This is the Italian Citizenship Podcast, hosted by Marco Permunian and Rafael Di Furia.
Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Citizenship Podcast, presented by Italiancitizenshipassistance.com. This week, we've decided to interrupt our normal programming schedule in light of recent updates. Recently, there have been some updates from the Italian government, which we will get into for those who would be making an application for Italian citizenship through a minor ancestor. And we'll be speaking with Italian attorney Marco Permunian, who is qualified to be able to make comments on the laws in Italy. And so one important factor to take into consideration is that there has been some information and news been spreading online in various groups and various avenues and various web pages. And in this episode, we wanted to try and get down to the nitty gritty because from my personal perspective, it seems as though there are certain things that might not have been represented in the most accurate way and may have even created some unnecessary panic. So Marco, can you tell us a little bit more about this so-called minor issue that people are very concerned about at this moment in time?
In this episode, we are going to be talking about cases involving an ancestor who became naturalized when their child was a minor. And let's keep in mind that until 1975, the age of majority in Italy was 21 years old. In the recent days, the Italian Ministry of Interior has released a communication directed to the Italian consulates abroad and Italian municipalities, establishing that the situation of an ancestor who became naturalized when their child was a minor would cause the loss of Italian citizenship, not only for the ancestor himself or herself, but also for the minor child, hence causing an interruption in the transfer of citizenship to the subsequent generations. This was due to three rulings from the Italian Supreme Court that established between 2023 and 2024 the same exact thing, only judicially, meaning in court. So the communication that was released just a couple of days ago was meant to communicate to the consulates and Italian municipalities that they no longer had to accept applications involving such a situation. The communication from the ministry also clearly established that the new interpretation was not to be applied to people who already received their Italian citizenship. And at this moment in time, it is unclear as to whether this new guideline will impact people whose application has been submitted and who have not received yet an approval. As I said a moment ago, the communication was issued by an Italian public administration, meaning the Ministry of Interior, and was directed to other public administrations like the consulates and the Italian municipalities, which depend from the ministry. However, the communication does not affect directly in any way judicial proceedings that are pending before Italian courts. In fact, despite the recent rulings from the Italian Supreme Court, the Italian courts are still approving for the majority cases that involve an ancestor who became naturalized when their child was a minor. So, in other words, people who have a pending case in an Italian court or people who want to present their case in an Italian court should not be concerned about this circolare in Italian or memo in English that was released by the Italian Ministry of Interior, because it does not, of course, apply to the judicial system automatically. In fact, the judicial system is, for the most part, disregarding the Supreme Court decisions that were just three and that were issued between 2023 and 2024, and which in the Italian legal system are not binding in any way for other judges, not even for the lower courts. The Italian legal system is much different from the legal system in the US, where the legal precedent can be legally binding to some extent, depending on the situation. But in Italy, it is never legally binding for any other courts, including lower courts. And in fact, we have been receiving approvals, even in the past months, way after the Supreme Court decisions came into effect. Now, any judge is free to apply or disregard the Supreme Court's decision. And for now, The majority of the judges, like I said, has decided not to apply the decision for the time being, and the trend is actually very positive. Let's also keep in mind that Italian consulates are, for the most part, not releasing new appointments, and therefore, a lot of people that were meant to use the consulates are filing their cases in court based on the law that exists in Italy that says that if you can't get a service from the public administration in a timely manner, you are allowed to pursue your right in court. And therefore, many people, including many of clients of ICA, are presenting their cases in the Italian courts, even if they had the ability to go through the consulate in theory, but they can't in practice because they can't get an appointment. Now, those people who are presenting their cases through the court and whose case is being affected by this so-called minor age issue, they don't have to worry about their case being affected by this so-called circolare, which was just issued by the Ministry of Interior, because that circolare does not affect the judicial system. And therefore, we can expect these cases to be approved. Of course, it will depend on which court will be responsible for ruling on this case. And like we said before, you need to file your case in the court in the region where the ancestor was born. But the majority of the courts are still in 2024 approving these cases, and therefore a lot of people will have the right recognized by the Italian courts, despite the official communication that was just released by the Ministry of Interior.
Well, thank you, Marco. That's very interesting, especially because over the last few years, as we know, getting an appointment at a consulate in the US has become more and more difficult, which actually makes me wonder if this is one of the reasons potentially why the circolare had been released. But Marco, I'm wondering, since we're on the topic of alternative options for individuals who might be applying for citizenship by descent, are there any other alternatives that a individual might have available to them?
Of course, right now we have been focusing on people whose case is being affected by the minor age of the child, of the ancestor when the ancestor became naturalized. But let's not forget that in a lot of cases, people have multiple ancestors that they can use. And therefore, even if, like I just said, the ancestor who is being affected by the issue could be potentially be used successfully in court, let's not forget that we can also look at other ancestors that may be available. For example, the female ancestor. If the male ancestor was the one who was naturalized when their child was a minor, maybe the female ancestor was either never naturalized or she was naturalized completely automatically and involuntarily, which is another category which is being presented in the Italian court and which is being very, very successful. And additionally, people could have multiple Italian lines. So if you have two sets of great-grandparents, for example, and one of your great-grandfathers became naturalized when their child was a minor, you could look at your other great-grandfather, and if he never naturalized or naturalized when their child was already an adult, of course, you should choose that great-grandfather to apply for citizenship. So let's say that, in short, even if a lot of people's cases might be affected by the new guidelines, let's not forget that the same exact case could be successfully presented in court. So the same case that would now be denied by a consulate or an Italian municipality could be successfully appealed in court. And not only that, you could have another ancestor, including the female, the wife of the ancestor who has this specific issue, that could be a viable path and that could be a very viable alternative.
So, Marco, a quick question for you then. Based on everything you've said so far, it sounds a lot like what you're saying is that even though this could affect a large number of people, that this might not actually be the end all be all. This might not cancel out a lot of people who would have the ability to apply. And it's more going to just change the path, the route, the place where you actually are applying through, or am I mistaken?
Yes, that is correct. So if somebody has an ancestor who was born in Italy and who was naturalized, when their child was a minor, they can no longer apply for citizenship through the consulate or an Italian municipality according to the new guidelines. However, these people can pursue citizenship via the Italian courts, so through a different path, which could also actually be more efficient and a quicker path to citizenship. And these lawsuits can be filed based on the fact that consulates are unable to give people an appointment for citizenship, or there are very long wait times to get an appointment for citizenship. Additionally, a lot of people could also qualify through an alternative ancestor, like a female ancestor or a completely different line, and could be able to apply for citizenship through, again, an alternative ancestor who could be a better choice.
Well, Marco, I think that's very interesting. And I think it might actually be worthwhile if we explore this topic a little bit further in the next episode. And actually, because of how much of a shakeup this is all going to be, what we are going to do here, for those of you who are listening or watching this on YouTube, is that we are going to release, ideally, this episode a little bit earlier than we normally would this week. And then from there, next week, we'll be back on the normal schedule. Normally, we switch between the Citizenship Podcast and the Italian Real Estate Podcast, but instead next week, just because of how everything's going, we're going to give you guys one Citizenship Podcast this week and another Citizenship Podcast next week. And then from there, we'll be returning back to our normal schedule, back with the Italian Real Estate Podcast. So Marco, thank you so much again for making yourself available, and especially on such short notice for this particular episode. And of course, if anybody is facing this particular problem and is needing your help, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, ItalianCitizenshipassistance.com.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more content like this and to stay up to date on what's going on with Italian law, be sure that you're subscribed to this YouTube channel, as well as the audio-only podcast, the Italian Citizenship Podcast. But of course, if you subscribe to this YouTube channel, you're also automatically subscribed to the Italian Real Estate Podcast, where we talk more about making Italy your home, purchasing property, renting property, as well as where to do so. And if you're interested in more about life abroad and living abroad, be sure to check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, or you can search on YouTube or your favorite podcasting player of choice for Not Your Average Globetrotter. But of course, we have been here again with Italian attorney Marco Permunian, and I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we'll see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.